The Netherlands is the latest country in Europe to ban full face coverings in some public spaces. Far rights groups have been leading the call to, as they put it, ban the burqa for decades. But is it really about national security or a symptom of Islamophobia? This is Roundtable. I'm David Foster. Welcome. The so-called burqa ban, what does it mean for women who choose to cover up? Are Muslim women being unfairly targeted? Are countries which introduce these bans actually violating a person's freedom of expression and their human rights?
The burqa and niqab, back at the centre of ongoing debate about multiculturalism in a rapidly modernising, security-conscious society. Measures to ban full-face coverings in public are creeping into law throughout Europe. What does it mean for those who choose to cover up in the name of faith? The Netherlands is the latest to join France, Belgium and Denmark in banning full-face coverings in some public spaces. The Dutch government says the law is religion neutral, but it will have an impact on Muslim women who choose to wear the burqa or niqab. It's a victory for far-right figures in the country who have been pushing for a burqa ban for decades. Senator Marjolein Faber, a member of the Nationalist Freedom Party, said the ban was the first step to de-Islamise the Netherlands. According to Associated Press, she went on to say, the next step is to close all the mosques in the Netherlands. Elsewhere in Europe, a spate of terrorist incidents and the pressures of the recent refugee crisis have led to a groundswell of support for right-leaning parties. And promises to ban the full-face veil have proven popular in recent years.
Sichtbar macht ab. Alle gemeinsam. Das ist eine gemeinsame Position. Sie passt nicht zu unserer offenen Gesellschaft. Gesicht zeigen ist für unsere Kommunikation, für das Zusammenleben, für den Zusammenhalt in unserer Gesellschaft konstitutiv.
Je refuse que les femmes soient voilées à l'école, à l'université, dans les services publics, dans les entreprises.
But human rights groups say anti-burqa bans violate freedom of expression and religion. Amnesty International said of Denmark's recent decision to fine those wearing full-face coverings in public, if the intention of this law was to protect women's rights, it fails abjectly. Instead, the law criminalises women for their choice of clothing, and in so doing flies in the face of those freedoms Denmark purports to uphold. Critics warn it could pave the way for increased Islamophobia in those countries where bans are enforced.
Men sandheden er, at når politikere de italesætter muslimer med sådan en hård retorik og hård måde, så har det nogle konsekvenser, der er, undskyld mit sprog, ikke særlig fornuftige mennesker i samfundet, som tager det her til sig.
Many also point to a double standard amongst politicians, who urge Muslim women to integrate as equal citizens, yet impose restrictions on their democratic rights and personal freedoms. Is the Netherlands' latest law about security, or is it a symptom of creeping Islamophobia in European countries? Opponents of the burqa will point to security, gender equality and women's rights, but they risk silencing the very women whose interests they claim to protect.
And I'm very pleased to say that joining us from Paris we have Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, French journalist and political commentator, who says the burqa is not European. With me in the studio, Megan Campbell, Deputy Director of the Human Rights Hub at the University of Oxford. We also have Anna Modena, reporter for Quartz, who's covered race and the rise of the far right in Europe, and Saha Al-Faifi from the Muslim Engagement and Development Group, who says face veil bans do demonize Muslim women. Welcome to each and every one of you. This is going to be, to some extent, about detail as well, and we'll get into that in just a moment, but it's also about personal stories. So let me ask you, first of all, give us the reasons why you feel you want to wear a face veil.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me today. Quite often in these discussions, you see my voice as a veiled woman completely missed. So it's really important to have all voices around this issue. The very reason of me wearing the face veil, it's an act of worship. It's a religious understanding of mine. And I feel that when I do that, I will be connected to God. It doesn't mean that I am better than someone who wears the headscarf, the hijab, or doesn't wear it at all. It is just part of my spiritual, personal journey. So it is part of my faith as well as part of my identity. And for me also is a symbol of resistance. I am resisting the patriarchal society. I am resisting misogyny that exists by wearing it. When you have,
and yet, I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah,
you talk about a patriarchal society. An awful lot of people will believe that it is because of a patriarchal society that you are covering up, that you are told to do so in the presence of other men, by your husbands or your fathers or whatever. I mean, you're saying it's a rejection of that. How can it be both? Or one or not?
Yeah, first of all, this is their perceptions, and I respect that. But for me, it is not because of a man I'm wearing it. It's not because of my father or a brother forced me to do it. For me, there is a Quranic interpretation of one of the verses that recommends it. It doesn't mean that women are not allowed or they have to wear it. It's just a recommendation that I follow. So when you have white, male, middle-age men telling you, don't wear this and take off this, I feel that this is
We'll get on to the
patriarchy.
security side of this in just a moment, because I think that's quite important. Certainly in a lot of African countries, they've introduced it for that very reason, a particular ban. But Anne-Elisabeth, let me come to you in Paris, one of the first countries, if not the first country in Europe, to introduce a form of banning of the face veil, and you said that that's quite right. Why?
Well, we introduced two different bans in France, and one is a partial ban. It's a ban in the social services, people who were in national services and civil service in the public space, for people to wear hijab, which is an entirely different thing, but that's where people, this is where we are the first. That was 2004, and the idea was, in France, we have secularism, laïcité, which means that you do not, religion is free and protected by the constitution, but it belongs to the private sphere and not the public sphere. So you can go to university and wear a hijab in France, but you can't go to school and wear a hijab, and teachers and civil servants can't wear it.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the statement you made when you said it is not European.
Oh, no, that's, first of all, it's not exactly, it's something slightly different that I said that you've got from the notes of people with whom I prepared this debate. And I'm now talking about the hijab. The hijab has existed certainly in Muslim communities in Europe. The burqa, however, is not something that certainly in France, I haven't spoken about Europe, and it doesn't belong mostly to the French tradition. In France, you have Muslim communities that mostly come from the Maghreb. And until about 15 years ago, you saw no burqas at all in France because that is not their tradition. If you look at pictures from the 19th century onwards to the 1950s, to the time before and after decolonization, women do not wear the burqa. The burqa is something that belongs to an entirely different religious tradition. It's Wahhabism, it's Salafism. That is very new in France.
Okay,
and
which is a stricter form of Islam. We won't go into the absolute details, but Anne-Elisabeth, thank you for now. Now I'm going to come back to you. I want to bring everybody in at the beginning of the programme. Amna, you are from a Muslim family, yeah? Whether you describe yourself as a good or a bad Muslim, that's irrelevant in this, but you choose not to wear it.
Yes.
Why, and what do you make of women that do?
Because I come from a family where and a community where it's always been a choice. It's always been up to the women to choose whether they want to wear the headscarf, whether they want to wear the burqa, whether they don't. I think, to be honest, there's only a few fundamental things that people have to do in Islam, and that's believe in Allah and believe that Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet. Like, I think everything else is really...
Do you think Emma's entitled to dress as she's dressing? Can I?
Of course.
Okay. All right. No. I'm asking the question.
That's,
Not showing a prejudice on my part. Carry
But
on.
that's, but this is the crux of the matter, that a lot of people think Muslims are here to superimpose their views on others, and this is not true. The values of freedom and democracy and human rights in general are universal values. Whether you're a Muslim, Christians, or a Jew, we all believe in these values.
Okay, carry on, Anna. I interrupted for an obvious reason.
Okay.
But
No
and
problem.
I think
forgive me for that.
that's something always important to remember, because some of the things that behind these burqa bans are the idea that women are being forced into it. Women are have no choice in the matter, and there's an element of white saviorism in this, where you're coming into these communities and you're helping and supporting them. And I've really looked into some of the studies and research, because just because my family, my community, people weren't being forced to do it, there might be scenarios where this is happening, and I wanted to know the extent of whether that's happening, and the data just doesn't show that to be the case. Every time Muslim women are being interviewed and being asked, are you being forced into this, they say no. You have Muslim women coming on these kind of shows to say, we are not being forced to do this. I don't know.
Former President Sarkozy of France said, in our country we cannot accept women prisoners behind a screen, cut off from social life, deprived of identity. It's a sign of subservience, a sign of debasement. Why do you think he said that?
I mean, has he spoken to many Muslim women? Has he spoken to many Muslim women who wear the burqa and who wear the hijab? I think these are questions, if you pose to them, those aren't the things that they say to you. Like, look, I don't want to wear it, but my opinion on it doesn't matter. If someone's turned around and said, I feel closer to God when I wear this, this is how I want to practice my faith, this has nothing to do whether I'm European or not, who am I to go in and say no?
We'll get onto the law in just a moment, Megan, if we can. But your personal view, first of all.
My personal view is that you mentioned the interpretation of the Quran being sort of based about where this idea that the burqa comes from, and then we could question about is that interpretation.
There is no writing in the Quran that says it is.
No, exactly. It was an interpretation.
Yes.
She said. So was that interpretation sort of steeped in patriarchy? How do we understand where it came from, and looking at it in the social context? So my own feelings about the burqa are complex, and that it is a difficult piece of clothing, because it can sort of symbolize a denial of personhood, especially in communication with other people. But at the same time, these bans are incredibly heavy-handed and are denying citizenship and participation to Muslim women in public life, and that is very deeply problematic.
But all they have to do is say, I'll take it off.
There shouldn't be conditions placed on people to be treated as equal citizens, conditions that you have to dress or look a certain way to be treated as a full member of society.
Anne-Elizabeth, let me ask you this. In France, there have been a number of terror attacks, and some of the criminalisation of the burqa, the face veil, has been ascribed to the need to protect society. Is there a sense in France that this is why it's being done, or not?
Not so much. Not so much. I mean, there have been arguments, which I myself, yes, it's possible that you can hide weapons inside a burqa, but I don't think they really matter. I don't think that's the main point. The main point is a bit different, is that this is something that's completely alien to the French tradition, Muslim tradition as well, and it's something that has a very political goal. And now you say, has President Sarkozy spoken to Muslim women? Of course he has. He had some of them in his government. And when I speak to Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian friends who come from the Maghreb, who do not belong to the tradition, they say you've got to hold fast in France, because this is political. This represents a retrograde and reactionary view of women and of society. This is something that is done quite consciously by the people who say you have to wear this, and it's going to be your best relationship with God, and you've got to separate yourself from the rest of society. And my Tunisian, Moroccan, and Algerian friends say, if France falters in this, we shall fall, because we already know societies in which you go to a place and first one woman wears it and then several women wear it and then they are forced. And the idea that women, I love the idea that you're allowed to wear the clothes you want to wear. And for the hijab, and I look at England, I look at Belgium, societies that don't have the same laïcité, secularism system as France, and I have no problems with women wearing the hijab. But I think the burqa sets women aside, and they create exactly the conditions by which actually the Salafists want to separate themselves from the rest of modern society.
Please, as I said at the beginning of the programme, to each one of you before we come in, do feel free to jump in if there's something you don't agree with that Anne-Elizabeth has just said.
Yeah.
Do so, but let me just get back to the security side of things, which is where I started in Paris. Outside Europe, Cameroon, banning burqas following suicide bombings by people wearing veils. Banned in Difa, region of Niger, because of Boko Haram, the terrorist group up there. Congo Brazzaville, banned since 2015 to prevent any attack of terrorism. It is easy to hide weapons. In fact, men can dress. Suicide bomber men can dress as women and hide their identity. Do you see any sense in this as a prevention
in
of
fact,
terrorism argument?
I don't see any sense in that, because the whole narrative that a Muslim woman is a threat to security is a false narrative. A lot of Muslim women, including me, we absolutely have no problem in revealing our identity whenever is needed. But also this narrative suggests that somehow Muslim women are prone to commit crimes more than anything else. And we are treating the Muslim community in Europe as a suspicious community that need to be regulated and looked at and scrutinized, so much so that it might prevent them from participating in public life. Now,
I must throw into that the fact that it's, in some of these countries, it is ski masks and full-face helmets that are also banned for security reasons, because you cannot identify the person underneath it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's aimed at making Muslim women feel excluded from society.
But what you have is that is a clear stigmatizing of the Muslim community, because what you see that a lot of politicians across the political spectrum using the niqab as a polarizing tool to divide us, because it's an easy solution for a big problem. We are talking about Britain after Brexit. We are talking about the rise of far right in Europe. These kind of narratives of that alienates immigrants communities have become normalized so much so that is accepted. But you see that they use the Muslim woman as okay, no problem.
You wanted to say something, then I want to come to you about far right.
One of the things is talking about the burqa ban. It seems it has to be country specific. Terrorism versus in Europe and other countries, it's all country specific. So speaking about it in sort of very broad terms isn't helpful for the debate. It has to be almost by jurisdiction to get the nuance, to understand what is happening to Muslim women with these bans.
What about the rise of the far right? Have they picked on this as one particular issue that is so easy to headline?
I think what's particularly interesting in Europe, particularly in Western Europe, we see some overlap actually between some feminists and the far right when it comes to this issue. And the rhetoric is that these women are being denied their identity, being denied their statehood. But how can you walk away from a situation in which a woman is walking down the road with her children and she's been stopped by the police and she's been asked to take something that she wants to wear off? Like, that feels quite deeply anti-feminist to me.
But are the far-right groups using this as a
I
as
definitely
an easy
think
target?
so. I think there are massive questions around integration. I don't think the left or the right can ignore it. I think there are massive questions about how do we have cohesive societies and communities in which people feel included and taken care of in the state and feel like they can access opportunities. Do we answer these really big questions by saying, okay, you know, like women who wear the burqa are a minority within a minority within a minority? This huge, massive focus on them about questions on social cohesion. I don't know if that makes much sense to me.
Yeah, what about Amnesty's point of view on this? From the law's point of view, it says a complete ban violate the rights to freedom of expression and religion of those who want to. Is that being tested anywhere?
There have been some cases at the European Court of Human Rights from France, a series of cases, and from Turkey about the hijab ban. And the courts have always been extremely deferential to government decisions to ban the burqa. They have not shown any willingness to kind of get involved to uphold either gender equality from a perspective that these are against gender equality, or for Muslim women's freedom of religion and expression. They've allowed the state to sort of pursue these policies in furtherance either of social cohesion or national security.
Which would suggest to me that there is their way, they can interpret the law whichever way they want, that there is no hard and fast rule that says this is a violation of human rights.
It's one of the challenges in human rights law is that the human rights are malleable. You mentioned can be seen as furthering gender equality or it can be seen as detracting from gender equality. And then it really comes down to what the courts or decision makers sort of background theories are thinking is about gender or about multiculturalism, integration, national security.
Anne Elizabeth, do you feel threatened if you see a woman wearing a burqa? Do you feel more in danger than if she's wearing strictly Western clothing?
No, of course I don't feel threatened. I feel sorry for her because she is denied the right to show her face. In her religion, men can show themselves and women are supposed to hide their hair or their face or their entire body because this is supposed to be inflame men, which absolutely shocks me. And to say that this is a symbol of the patriarchy not to want the burqa, to me, is a wonderfully clever but false way of flipping the argument on its head. I feel threatened as a woman for the fact that if this spreads, I will be denied the most basic right of having a face, having a personality, having an expression. And that really shocks me, especially when in some conservative rulings of Islam, women and Sharia courts, women's testimony counts for less than men's testimony.
But nobody's ever going to force you to wear one of these, are they?
Well, no, but they will force my friends in Arab countries. And believe me, as I said, you know, in Maghreb, in Egypt, I have so many friends who feel that they're forced. I have friends who went to Al-Azhar University up till 1990. I've seen class pictures of Al-Azhar and no woman was wearing a hijab or anything. And then they started wearing hijabs.
Jump in, Sahar.
She's using examples of countries from the third world that are known of human rights violations. You know, she's talking about Egypt, she's talking about Morocco. These countries should not be our examples as advanced democratic European countries. The violations in these countries are way beyond imagination, and to use them as example is quite bizarre. I mean, whether you see a woman wearing a skirt or a veil, I don't think it's up to me or you to tell her what to wear and what not to. And in fact, actually, the discussion around the face veil is colonial. A lot, if you read about the colonial literature, a lot of the colonialists, they used to be frustrated from Muslim women in Morocco, the countries that you mentioned, Morocco, Algeria. They were really frustrated about the fact how on earth a woman...
Let's be fair about this. It is principally Arab cultures that either do it or ask their women or force their women to do it. It's nothing to do with Western colonialism.
No, there is a link to Western colonialism. Whether it's Arab or not, it's a preference. There are different interpretations. This is number one. Secondly, it is colonial. If you read the colonial literature, you see Frantz Fanon, for example. He is a post-colonial theorist. He spoke about how the colonizers are so frustrated of a woman wearing the face veil because it's a form of independent agency. They are resisting the norms around you that their body is owned by the public. Yeah. So there are different nuances to it. And
we're slightly running out of time. I'm sorry to have to say this, but let me ask you, Aman, as somebody who's writing about this and seeing what you described as the rise of far-right, centre-right groups, is there a possibility that Muslim women such as you, who are very westernized, might decide, actually, sorry, this is Islamophobia, I am going to wear it as a protest?
So there was a really interesting sociological studies that are happening in France, because I think France is a really interesting example because they did this in 2010. What have been some of the impact on what's happening to these women now? It's a bit more difficult because France doesn't measure race and doesn't necessarily go around asking its population, are you this, are you that? So scientifically, the data is not amazing, but some of the stuff that we're seeing is there's not that many women who went, oh, thank you, you've liberated me, I'm now going to stop wearing. There are many women
be more inclined to wear it.
And then there's been some cases, again, there aren't many numbers, but there've been some cases where it's become a political issue for them. Before, it was an issue of faith and religion, and now they feel they're being demonized by the state.
Sorry, Anne Elizabeth, we couldn't hear you. Just come have another go.
No, it always was a political issue because 15 years ago you had only 200 women wearing the burqa. And unfortunately, there has been a spread, which is a politically motivated spread of Salafist Islam and Wahhabi Islam. And that's been spread by the usual ways, the internet, etc. And that is actually, I mean, I have great admiration for Sahar because she's a wonderful, wonderful propagandist for this. And she uses every expression and every keyword to say exactly the opposite of what they mean. This is you want to separate them, and because you want them to be separated, you make this into this issue of human rights. I call this men's right, not human rights.
Megan, let me ask you to round off the discussion, because I'm interested to know if it's criminalised in a number of different places, but has anybody ever been taken to court or fined or?
To the extent of my knowledge, no. There must be fines.
And you're the law expert at this table.
I don't know of anyone being sentenced to, say, 6 months in prison because they've been wearing, but I imagine that there has been some regulations and some fines. And the more important thing is the chilling effect of the law. The law is sending out a message that you're not welcome to participate unless you dress a certain way, and how that might affect women's decision-making, how they interact with their friends, their neighbors, their government, all changes. So the law, even though it might not be enforced on the books, has consequences in real life.
And is it more likely that we may see the law enforced given the rise of populist governments across Europe? You can't say for sure, but
no, but it's always, if it's on the books, and it's always able to be enforced if the political winds change.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, thank you all very much indeed. We haven't got time for any more. Anne Elizabeth, thank you for joining us from Paris, a sweltering Paris. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to stay indoors, and thank you at this table for coming to talk to us. It's a matter of personal opinion. You may like what I'm wearing, you may loathe what I am wearing, you may be completely indifferent to what I'm wearing, but it's my choice to wear this, and I think I should have the right to choose what I wear. That's just me, David Foster, saying that. We've had a variety of opinions from around the table, and let's keep them going. In future editions of Round Table, thank you for your company, thank you for watching. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.